Always nice to see the boys in orange out there getting a little practice time, just like we see here caught by Daniel Hathaway on his local waterways, but I'm sure they're about to get plenty more practice as we continue through this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to Lake Michigan, where this was the scene a little over a week ago as madness on the lake ensued, when some winds rolled in Evanstown, Illinois, all of a sudden causing some rolling waves on the lake, causing 5 vessels to capsize in under 2 minutes, causing rescue crews to get into a frantic pace to try and get out in the water and get everybody pulled out, including this vessel that got caught in the breakwater here. The winds that rolled in turned what was a relatively calm day out on Lake Michigan into 2 to 3 foot rollers quickly, catching most of these boaters off guard. As mentioned, officials claim that 5 vessels capsized, including 2 sailing vessels from the Northwestern University Sailing Club, sending 8 people into the water. Fortunately, in this situation, the Evanston fire chief was quoted later as saying everyone on all the boats was accounted for, several were rescued by rescue crews, and some made it back to shore on their own, and miraculously, nobody was injured during this event. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to southern Australia, where Nat Drummond had a really close encounter during a surf ski event that was occurring off the coast. The surf skier was entered in a race with approximately 65 other surf skiers when all of a sudden, no more than 20 seconds into the race, Nat felt a huge thud on the bottom of his surf ski, which sent him flying in the air, eventually landing in the water, only to realize his surf ski had been attacked by a great white shark. Fortunately, officials were quickly able to jump into the water and get Nat pulled from the water, and no injuries were reported. Nat was asked after the incident if this would discourage him from getting back on the water and continuing the race, and he said no, this was a 1 in a million freak accident. In fact, he may go buy a lotto ticket. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Louisiana, where this was the scene just a few days ago when the Coast Guard got a call around 6:35 p.m. saying that a helicopter crashed approximately 46 miles off the coast of Morgan City with 3 people on board. The Coast Guard quickly issued an urgent marine information broadcast to alert mariners in the area of the situation if they could lend a hand, and also launched air assets to the scene. Fortunately for this crew, there happened to be a Good Samaritan vessel in the area, which was an oil rig crew boat, which was the first to respond to the scene. Quickly after arriving, they reported back to the Coast Guard that they were able to successfully pull 2 survivors out of a life raft from the incident. Shortly after, Jayhawk air crews arrived and hoisted the 2 crew members, who were then transferred to the Medical University of New Orleans. Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Shonda George was quoted after the incident saying they were grateful they were able to save the 2 crew members, and of course saddened by the loss of the 3rd, who was later found inside the helicopter. And of course they'd like to extend their deepest sympathies to the crew members' family and friends during this difficult time, as we would as well. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Hawaii, where nearly 12 years ago this was the scene as the vessel SemiSub 1 was christened. SemiSub 1 was designed to be a commercial tour vessel, giving tourgoers a different kind of experience, as the vessel had glass windows inserted into the hull of the catamaran, allowing its tourgoers to get both an experience above and below the water. But allegedly, the vessel's been used for a little more than tourgoers over the last 12 years, as the current owners, Curtis Jackson and Jamie Jackson, have been indicted on charges of security fraud, conspiracy, mail fraud, and wire fraud, as the couple allegedly used the one vessel they had built to entice investors into giving them money toward building a fleet of these boats for tourism, defrauding almost 400 people from nearly $28 million according to reports. The couple, according to indictment reports, was selling securities in states they were barred from doing so in, and also falsifying financial documents, making things look a little better on paper to investors than they actually were. Also, they had allegedly falsely claimed that SemiSub had entered into agreements or development relationships with marquee government agencies and well-known private equity firms to build and sell a fleet of additional assets for $32 million each. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to the Maldives, where this was the scene a few weeks back when a viewer, Luke Mitchell, saw a vessel coming into port that wound up striking a reef around 6 p.m. Fortunately, Luke and his crew was able to jump into action and rescue the 15 crew members who were on board this vessel, who were returning to the Bandos Resort from a local football match in the Faroe Islands. Unfortunately, Luke and his crew did go out in the morning to try and pull this vessel off the reef, but by the time they arrived, the weather had turned in the morning and the vessel vessel unfortunately had sank. Fortunately, there were no injuries reported in this incident due to Luke and his crew's fast work. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out on your waterways, be sure to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram and let me know, and you might see your stories over here. Just like Luke Mitchell, Daniel Hathaway, Sean Shanahan, Vincent Lopp, and Amy and Chase Lee did this week. And if you guys haven't already,
drop an anchor on the subscribe button here, or I'm gonna steal your drain plug.